Thelb Karu by Conway Fitzgerald. Part 2. Bearers of the Broadsword. 75 years had passed since that day Thelb Karu first arrived at the doors of the Armesh Doa. In that time, he had developed into a master wizard. He even surpassed the level of his best friend, Lassiter. Thelb excelled in both his magic efficacy and acumen, despite Lassiter's 50-some-year head start. Yet Thelb and Lassiter were both now very proficient spellcasters, learning everything they could from the Archmagi, Pareb Ceim. They had also gained much experience, achieving success on their many dangerous missions outside of the wall of the school. The two had become a powerful tandem, but that, as well as Thelb's days among the Armesh Doa, had finally come to an end. The first breeding instincts they experienced were tough, but surmountable for both of them to bear. It tested their ability to meditate for extended periods, to overcome the call of their bodies with the discipline of their minds. But this latest spring wind struck Thelb in ways he could have never anticipated. His reproductive organs were always aroused, and no meditation or masturbatory practice could settle his overpowering sex drive. He needed to mate now, or die trying.
I have shown you all I can. Now you must begin the next stage of your metamorphosis,
said the Ancient One, Pareb Ceim, now 1,610 years old.
I have no desire to change my path, Great One. I have found absolution in your teaching. But how can I overcome? I remember the urges of the Taledal,
the old man said, smiling mischievously, recalling fondly feelings he had not known in over a millennium.
Difficult to focus the mind on anything else. I often wonder what might have come had I partook,
he said with a greater smile.
Tell me how to overcome this, Great One. I must remain here, for I am not ready.
Thelb's greatest fear was uncertainty in himself. He did not know what awaited him at the Mirdet Chenu, but he realized that was where he must return. He needed to fulfill his promise to his mother, and most importantly, be distinguished enough to win the hand of his chosen, Usiwaie Valtir.
You are ready, and the time has come for you to go,
the Archmagi proclaimed. There could be no argument.
Allow me to accompany him, Great One,
suggested Lassiter, who had passed his test years before and overcome his intense desires.
No, he must go alone. I have another mission for you, young Lassiter. But fear not. You two shall meet again,
the Archmagi promised. The notion of going home only added to the bonfire of excitement which conflagrated within Thelb's body. He had lost all sense of patience. His knack for calm calculation and thoughtful temperament had abandoned him. Lassiter could see it and understood the danger.
Try not to speak with anyone, particularly any humans. Pretend you only speak certain words of their language, just to get by,
Lassiter said, helping him prepare his pack.
Oh, I've created this for you,
he said, holding a potion in his thin gray hands.
Be careful with the dosage. Too much will put you in a sleeping trance for weeks. 1 shot in the morning, 1 at night before rest,
he prescribed. The potion was Welseb, a pain-killing, body-numbing near poison.
It's the only way I survived it,
he assured him, putting it in Theb's pack.
Just don't bring this into the Mirdet. It's quite illegal there.
Thelb felt so helpless. He had gained so much magic power and confidence, and proved his intellect was second to none among his fellow students. Now his body betrayed him, reducing him to a fidgety, frightened barrel of emotions.
Thank you, old friend.
Thelb managed with a meager smile.
The Archmagi has said we will meet again.
Thelb recounted. Lassiter smiled back.
Oh, I almost forgot. I've also conjured this for you.
He pulled a bag of coins from his pocket.
These appear as gold of Honan. Quite valuable. Be sure to pay up front. Hopefully the sea captain doesn't like to count his coins. For the duration will only be a few days,
Lassiter warned. Lassiter was not permitted to leave the Armesh Doa with Theb. He could not even help Theb reach Honan, let alone arrange for passage to the mainland. Theb's life was now completely in the hands of fate. Theb did manage to negotiate a ship out of port, posing as a human scholar from the great Eastern Empire. He overpaid the captain to greatly reduce the amount of haggling, and boarded the craft quietly. He rarely left his quarters. Theb nearly overdosed on the Welseb twice. The second time was the worst. He was barely awakened by the pounding on his cabin door.
"You in there?"
yelled one of the burly crew members.
"Are you alive? Open the door now, or we'll break it down."
He banged on the door again. Theb opened his eyes and heard the man's warning. He was still extremely cloudy and half awake. He had been asleep for several days, so he reached for his supply of liquids, including more of the Welseb. Theb found the potion worked well for the prevention of seasickness, among the other mind-quieting effects it provided. But his tolerance, and now dependency on the drug, had nearly killed him. The crewman beat on the door again.
"Last warning, or we're breaking it in."
Theb scrambled for his human scholar's robe and his bag of magic components. He needed to restore his human form immediately. The two crewmen outside his door looked to each other for reassurance. Then one nodded to the other. The larger of the two of them then took a couple of steps back and readied his shoulder to break down the door. Yet moments before he thrust himself forward, Theb opened the door.
Not you. Feeling well. Must rest, please.
Theb said, with a heavy accent akin to the great Eastern Empire.
"The captain is on deck. He says to bring you up there. He needs to have a few words with you,"
the crewman demanded.
No, perhaps another time. I am not feeling well. Must rest.
Theb insisted. The two men then pressed through the door and dragged Theb out by each arm. Theb then felt a burst of adrenaline, which helped him to awaken a bit more. Before he could react, the two crewmen had secured him in their grip and then dragged him up onto the deck. There awaited the captain, standing beside a plank, with his entire crew around him. Theb, still posing as the Eastern scholar, was dragged before him.
"Well, I'm not sure how you did it, but I must admit, this trickery is impressive,"
said the captain. He then tossed one of the wooden chips Lassiter had used to create the fool's gold.
"I'm hoping, for your sake, you have some real gold somewhere in your bag,"
the captain warned as he flipped another phony coin at Theb.
"For if not, your voyage ends here,"
the captain said as his crew cheered eagerly.
"What do we do with tricksters, boys?" They walk the plank is what they do.
They walk the
plank.
They yelled out. The crewmen then assembled in a circle around Thelb, all brandishing their weapons. They prodded and poked at him until he had reached the plank that led to the endless cold sea. The privateers laughed and jeered.
Now, have you any real money to pay? Or is this where you depart?
The captain said, pointing his short sword into Theb's abdomen. The pinch of the steely blade caused Theb to react in a way he did not expect. He leapt up onto the plank and looked down to the crashing waves beneath. The crew continued to laugh.
Get him. Got him. Ah, so this is where you depart then. Well, off with you,
yelled the captain, swinging his sword at Theb's knees. Theb then showed him his superhuman dexterity, leaping over the blade and remaining on the plank, despite the rocking waves. Then he took another step back, and with a taunting smile, he leapt off. The crew cheered in pleasant surprise. They had yet to actually send a victim overboard this way. The captain was quite vexed, and leaned over the deck to the water below to see where the man went in. But he could not see him. Suddenly, Theb appeared above him, above the waters, flying without wings. He was chanting.
He's a warlock. Shoot him,
commanded the captain. A crewman pointed the huge deck-mounted harpoon at Theb. But before they could shoot it at him, Theb delivered a massive fireball into the ship's deck. The magic flames burst through the deck and into the cargo hold, which happened to be filled with highly flammable oils and alcohols. That caused the vessel to explode into two parts. Before Theb fully realized what he had done, the ship had burned and sunk. Only a few stray crew remained, crying for salvation as they rocked in the cold ocean waves below. Theb had never killed a humanoid person before that moment. On his many missions, he had destroyed nasty hominoids and monsters, but never a human or elf. He did not think of himself as a murderer. He was overcome with anger, which was brought on by intense fear. This fear caused him to act and to kill. Though it felt excellent at first, the idea of finally having the power to overcome the naked aggression foisted against him. Though the wailing of the forsaken crewmen made him feel uncertain, he was torn. Happier they were the ones in the ocean, not him. But he did not relish in the suffering of others. Theb had a momentary thought of perhaps rescuing the hapless crew, offering them a chance at life. It was then he realized that despite being dry, high above the waves, he too was in the middle of a vast ocean, without a ship. His powers of flight magic had a limited duration. It appeared the compulsion of his newly uncovered emotions had caused him to act quite foolishly, and perhaps kill himself in the process. Theb looked to each star-filled horizon and convinced himself that the glow of dawn was coming. So he then headed away from that first rising star to the west, with the faint hope he was not too far from shore. He flew as quickly and directly as he could through the brisk night. All the while he was growing colder and more tired. The effects of all the welseb he had taken to stabilize his passions was now wearing off, though its tiring after effects were taking their toll. Theb's last waking memory was seeing what he believed to be a darkened coastline far off in the distance. It was then his flight magic failed him, and he plummeted like a stone into the cold ocean below. Theb had no recollection of what happened, but right after plunging deep into the cold, windswept waves, A mighty griffin snatched him up with its mighty talons, and then flew his lifeless body back to its nest on shore. Thelb awoke to the sound of griffin younglings chirping beside him, awaiting their mother to bring more foods to their mouths. He slept through it as they pecked at him. Thelb was familiar with domesticated griffins. They were common within the Mirdet, but he had never encountered one in the wild. Were these younglings a few weeks older, they would likely have torn him to shreds. When the mother griffin returned to the nest, she screeched menacingly at Thelb, as if to suggest he had worn out his welcome. Thelb leapt out of the nest reflexively, nearly falling to his death. He descended through a vast expanse of jungle vines and tree branches. He managed to break his fall with a levitation incantation. This enabled him a graceful and painless descent the remainder of the way to the jungle floor. Thelb was unsure why the griffin had spared him, or if it truly intended to feed him to its young. But given this miraculous chance at a longer life, and with his hormones now surging more than ever, he was grateful. Thelb made his way carefully through a picturesque river valley deep within a southeastern rainforest. The landscape was spectacular, but the surroundings were deadly. There was no humanoid life to be found therein. Hidden among the colorful flora were mammal-eating plants and venomous creatures of all types. In the evening, the rain came again. Thelb had exhausted himself trekking through the rainforest. Though strangely, despite being amidst all of this looming danger, Thelb no longer felt afraid. For the first time in his long life, among all these jungle threats, he felt a true sense of belonging. He was one with the harsh jungle. He understood it. His desire for life and procreation were just like that of every bird, beast, and flower about him. Thelb pondered the prophetic words of the Archmagi, that his destiny would be that of a powerful dark agent, bringing fear into the hearts of all he encountered. At first, he considered those words an attempt to scare him into proper behavior. Now, alone in this harsh jungle, he realized what the Archmage truly meant. Making his way through the valley, Thelb was confident he should emerge the most dangerous creature within. He had amassed great power, and he liked the feeling that power gave him, when combined with his intensifying desire to procreate. He felt invincible. Thelb then rested beneath a patch of giant forest mushrooms. He slept while squatted beneath his cloak. The forest rain poured down all around him. When the rain stopped, he awoke to the sound and pressure of a giant sniffing nose. It was a curious purring of a giant jungle tiger. Thelb's eyes opened and became affixed to the giant jungle cat's leering eyes. Thelb stared back into the giant tiger's gaze. He knew he was dead if he moved, so he was still, only staring back confidently into the jungle cat's glaring gaze. Thelb thought to himself, if I had my magic, you'd already be dead. The mighty cat then leapt away. He had won the stare down. For the moment, Thelb was the deadliest creature in this tangled wood. On the long track back north to the endless wood, Thelb passed through many human villages. He no longer had any fear of the humans. Henceforth, it was they that would learn to fear him. He found it remarkably easier to simply take what he needed by force or guile, rather than attempt to barter with them. He so loathed the human traders that he felt no shame or guilt for robbing them and tricking them with magic. His impassioned crime spree continued all the way back home to the Mirdet Chenu. It had been over 75 years since he left the Mirdet, but unlike that day he fled in fear, Thelb was now fully equipped with money, arms, and magic components. On his journey north, he had amassed enough gold and treasure to buy his way past any guard or office holder within the walls of the Mirdet. Thelb was certain his time had come. He was ready to claim what was his, to claim Usiwaie. He had chosen her. He could still see her face upon his own. Each thought he had, he shared as if he had seen it with her eyes. The Mirdet was a series of villages hugging a rocky terrain that surrounded a mountain peak within the endless wood. No one would go there unless they knew exactly where it was and had an expressed reason to do so. Thelb's was clear, though when he finally reached his destination, he was reminded of his duties to family and the import of locating his mother. This overcame his compulsive lust for completion with Usiwaie. Thelb reached the outskirts of his homeland just as he came down from a rush of reproductive euphoria. He felt a strange new sense of guilt as he thought of his mother. Where would he find her? Why had he not even thought of her over this last near century? Perhaps he was not a good son. Perhaps he was not worthy of Usiwaie. These mental high winds swept through him, leaving him dazed and bewildered as he staggered through the shanty ghettos of the outer boroughs. He neglected to use any stealth magic, as his mind was clouded with so many thoughts and impulses. He could barely focus on the matter at hand. Thelb hustled impatiently through the crowds of the poor, forgotten, exterior members of the Society of High Elves. Finally, he reached the door of the home he left nearly a century prior. His breathing was heavy, and his mind was still dizzied with indecision. He reached out cautiously to knock on the old wooden door when a voice rang out behind him.
She is not there,
said the dry, whispering voice. Thelb pivoted defensively. There before him was one of the elder female servants of his family. She was one of the few remaining faithful that followed his mother into this neighborhood. She served his father to his death, only to be left here without further prospects of advancement.
Where have you been, son of Therath? Why have you returned here now? Rustapine. My mother, Ruliar.
Thelb asked desperately of the woman who once nursed him from infancy.
She is gone, Thelb. They took her away. No one knows what came of her. There were rumors she became sick and died as well. No, that cannot be.
Thelb became incensed. The guilt he felt for his departure consumed him. Before he left, he knew such fate to be inevitable. Now he did not want to hear that it was true. Thelb then acted impulsively, like this day may well be his last. Thelb turned defiantly from his once affectionate wet nurse and incanted a powerful magic spell. He then flew up into the air, as if fired like an arrow, for all the gathered indigents to witness. Word would surely spread of this act, as the unsanctioned use of magic within the Mirdet was punishable by death. Theb's young mind was rocked with intense thoughts and emotions, a cacophony of creative intelligence and muddied anger, of allegiance and betrayal, hope and regret. His emotions compelled him to enter into the heart of the Myrdet's political power, into the House of Zet. Before he could reconsider his intentions for being there, he had already breached the security of the towers, landing on an empty stone balcony high above the city's center. Only a warlock, using ancient power of magic flight, could ascend from the slummy limits of the city to the highest place of power so effortlessly. But this flagrant act did not escape the detection of the Myrdet's most ancient security force. They were called the Bidan Taut, the bearers of the broadsword. These were gray elf eunuchs that were selected and trained meticulously in the martial arts with the sole task of defending the sovereign and his family. They had given up the promise of a long life, as well as the chance for sacred, eternal progeny, to this sole purpose. Personal ambition was beaten out of them to ensure the complete dedication to their client family. Much in the way an elvish mate would be chosen with the highest level of devotion, so too would these eunuchs love and sacrifice everything for their assigned master. For this reason, the entirety of the Bidan Taut were stationed inside that strangely silent palace. They laid in wait, observing this foolish invader, Thelb Karu. Among the many skills of the Bidan Taut was the ability to detect magic and invisibility. Like the most skilled thieves, they were adept at hiding in both shadows and in plain sight, making themselves nearly undetectable. Like the greatest of warriors, they were highly skilled, masters in the use of the broadsword. Intense physical training and constant practice of their martial skills was their only occupation, outside of defending the sovereign. Theb wandered nervously through the posh and expansive living quarters within the House of Zet. He wasn't sure who or what he expected to find, or what he might say or do when he did. His clouded mind was still suffering the storm of hormonal imbalance. There could be no thoughts of retreat, for it was already too late. The Bidan Taut were already surrounding him. Each portico within the palace hid another one of these shadowy defenders. As Theb breached their zone of defense, they would follow him in turn until 6 of them had encircled him in the master study. Theb passed what appeared to be a statue to his right that was placed between 2 large bookshelves. He observed the statue move. When he turned and focused on it, he realized it was an armed gray elf, stoic and steady. This was unlike any gray elf he had ever seen. It was of perfect physical fitness, wearing no armor, only metal rings as defense around its neck, waist, wrists, knees, and elbows. Its head was shaved, with the exception of a long mane from the top of its head that was braided ornately within similar metal rings. The elf clutched the pommel of his broadsword tightly within his 2 strong hands. Its face was emotionless. When the Bidan Taut guard moved into fighting position, Theb's instincts took over. Theb cast a magic shield about his body. Had he not, he would have been struck down from behind moments later as the broadsword of another guardsman was brought to bear on the back of his neck. When the sword struck the magic shield around Theb, the sword's impact sparked and whistled, preventing him from harm. 3 others made skillful moves and also connected with Theb's knees, hands, and back. But each powerful blow was repelled by the powerful magic shield Theb had cast. Though this kind of defense magic required great concentration and did not afford the caster a lot of movement, so Thelb withdrew the magic shield and made a deft attempt to flee the scene. Thelb was miraculously dexterous, and therefore nearly succeeded. But before he could retrace his steps and reach the tower, he was tackled and pinned by one of the Bidan Tout. He was then bound and beaten savagely until the sovereign arrived.
What is this?
Demanded the sovereign of his guardians.
An intruder, anointed one. He is a user of magic,
answered the Bidan guardian, who had apprehended Thelb. Pareb Ceim approached more closely to inspect and see the face of the intruder.
Who are you? How dare you enter my home using magic?
Theb's swollen and bloodied face lifted to face him. Just as he did, several more of the Bidan Tout entered the room with other members of the Zet family, including the young heir, Artherum, and his soon-to-be wife, Usiwaie Valtir. When Theb's eyes met Usiwai's, his intense reproductive drive caused him to attempt to break free of the strong bindings and grip of the Bidan Tout. But when he could not achieve freedom, he wailed in a tormented primal scream. Usiwaie turned from him and left the room. Hearing Theb's primal cries forced her to run in tears. The young heir of the Zet then approached Thelb with much curiosity.
You. I know you. You are the son of Thelb Karu. You are Thelb Karu,
the young elf deduced. His father approached him from behind and grasped his son's shoulders.
Yes, I believe you are correct, my son. Is it you, Thelb Karu?
The sovereign asked.
Where is my mother? What have you done with her?
Thelb screamed violently at him. The sovereign took a step back defensively with his son.
I have no idea what you speak of,
the sovereign insisted. Then one of his ministers approached and spoke into his ear.
Ah, yes, Ruli. She succumbed to the same illness as your father. Tragedy.
The sovereign shook his head with regret.
But why then would you come to me? Do you mean to suggest that I caused her illness?
He asked in a mocking tone. Thelb let out another primal scream and grunt. It was clear now to the sovereign that young Thelb was in his time of mating. Pareb had endured it many times himself. It was not a pleasant state to experience or witness, causing suffering males to become ill-tempered and sometimes even violent.
Have you lost all of your senses, young Karu? Have you any control over yourself? You have violated my home and violated the laws of your ancient homeland. Take him away. I will speak with the judges, and we will see what must be done with him,
the sovereign decreed. Thelb was imprisoned within the central tower for several weeks. He suffered ever more intensely as his reproductive drive reached its zenith. The guards were compelled to restrain him within his cell to prevent him from hurting himself. He was bound. He could not eat. He was dying, both physically and emotionally. Then he was summoned and dragged before the highest court of the Mirdet. The defense counsel was allowed to present his case first.
Great judges, this brave elf is the son of one of the Mirdet's most honorable sons, Thelb Karu. Tragically, this defendant lost both parents, as well as his entire estate, to the illness.
Our great mages have assured us that he himself is clear from disease.
We don't know if that is permanent.
One of the prosecutors interrupted. The defense counsel continued.
This fine product of our homeland should not become a wasted life. He has proven himself strong, intelligent, and capable. He has become most learned in the arcane arts, even at this young age.
He was using magic illegally from an unsanctioned source within the walls of the Mirdet. He used it so he could intrude on the house of Zet. Who knows what he intended to do to our honored sovereign? He must be put to death. It is our law. From whom did you learn this magic?
One of the 7 elder judges demanded to know. He looked directly at Thelb. His counsel gestured for him to answer.
From the great Archmagi himself, Pareb Ceim. He is the one who taught me.
Thelb declared.
Pareb Ceim is dead,
Retorted the prosecutor.
He has been for many years. The Armesh Doa is now in the hands of the humans. These are all lies he speaks. You lie. Pareb Ceim lives,
Insisted Thelb. Though the judges knew better. They had learned of his recent death and the final removal of the elves from the Armesh Doa. Though it was plausible to believe that is where Thelb was hiding over the last near century, they deduced.
No more outbursts, young Karu.
Instructed the senior judge. He then motioned for the defense to finish.
In closing, it is the way of our people to cherish long life. This elf was simply trying to find answers from the sovereign, not to hurt anyone. He has hurt no one. He was unarmed.
That is immaterial, judges. He has used magic with the clear intention of violence.
The prosecution thrust forward their most pointed accusation.
Allow him to finish.
The judge demanded of the prosecutor.
How can any male know their intentions when they are struck with the urges brought on by the time of mating? He was afforded no friends or even family to help guide and protect him in this time. He was helpless to the demands of the Eternals. It is for this reason I beseech the court to allow his long life to proceed and allow him a chance to rebuild his family and his legacy.
The defense rested on that notion. The prosecution then tore it to pieces.
This elf left his family, abandoned his mother's side in her greatest time of need. He was ordered by this very court to remain outside of the walls of the Mirdet. This, at the direction of the mages of health. He breached that order and fled the city to obtain unsanctioned powers from foreign schools of dark magic. This is also a crime, punishable by death. Then, he has the audacity to return a century later, demanding answers. Foolishness. This defense is, yes, long life is our credo. Unless, of course, The holder of that life does not value it himself. That is our way. That is justice done here.
The prosecution rested. The judges then deliberated for many weeks. Finally, the day of judgment had arrived, and Thelb was brought before the court for its judgment and his sentencing.
The sovereign has asked for clemency. He knew the subject's family and loved them very much. He understands the drive of the time of mating and understands the folly it can bring to a young mind. Therefore, we judges have agreed to allow this elf one last chance at a long life. We are prepared to offer him a way to reforge his place within a family and rededicate himself to the defense of the Mirdet. He shall have the option of death by fire or joining the Beat-on-Tout.
Thelb was stunned by this verdict. To become a member of a sect of eunuchs required castration, a painful removal of the vital sexual glands. Though he struggled intensely with his current time of mating and wanted desperately for it to end, death perhaps, he thought, was the better option.
Removing the weight of reproduction will settle his mind if he can survive the fierce training and rededicate himself to the protection of the sovereign. Then that shall be his destiny. If he cannot, then he shall be burned alive and forever cleansed of this guilt.
The judges had ruled. Thelb had only one path remaining for the preservation of his long life, though he had no intention of taking it. The morning after the ruling, 3 tall elves in red robes were escorted into Theb's cell. They unfurled their hoods, revealing themselves as the 3 ministers of health.
It is time,
one of them said, pulling a long, curved blade that flickered in the torchlight.
No, I have chosen the fire,
Thelb demanded. He struggled in his bindings as another one of the ministers approached.
The judges have ruled. The sovereign has commanded. You shall be Beat-on-Tout.
The minister said menacingly.
I will not,
Thelb demanded, kicking towards him to keep him back.
You've taken everything from me. You will not take my Shirah. It has been decided,
the minister said. He then used a powerful sleep magic upon Thelb. Despite the horrific pain he suffered, Thelb could not awaken. After subduing him with magic, the ministers drugged him with powerful, noxious potions. He then embarked on a drug-induced, nightmarish hellscape for many days. When Thelb awakened, he was no longer whole. He endured the intense pain and humiliation of castration. With the loss of his Shirah, evaporated any hope for a restoration of the House of Karu, or for the hand of Usiwaie. After his heart forsook all of the sadness, he was left only with revenge. This act of mutilation was the main intention behind Pareb Ceim's mercy, to eliminate any other possible suitor for Usiwaie. Pareb could see she was very impressed by Thelb's boldness. She pleaded for mercy, on the grounds he had returned only to demand justice for his family. Pareb's greatest fear was of Usiwaie being lured away by an elf like Thelb Karu, bold, brilliant, and ready for mating. Usiwaie's time of mating would precede that of the young heir by many decades. Therefore, Thelb was a great threat to him. A ready suitor, returning home to claim the most cherished bride within the Mirdet. This move, this form of mercy, ended that threat for all time. The 12 members of the Bidan Taut did not want or expect Thelb to survive their rigorous training. They beat on him and taunted him mercilessly, bludgeoning out any thoughts of a purpose outside of absolute servitude to the sovereign. Thelb no longer held on to the face of his chosen mate, Usiwaie. He no longer wore it atop his own. Now, she was the object of his love and dedication only because of his sheer devotion to the task of her defense, and that of her groom-to-be, the young Pareb Ceim. Thelb's intense, existential true love was reduced thereafter to an unwavering devotion for that which he guarded. Thoughts of selfish wants and needs were beaten from his mind. This enabled him to survive the initiation and become one of the 13 Bidan Taut. After a dozen years of intense training, he finally earned his right to be named a bearer of the broadsword.
Thanks so much for watching, everyone. If you haven't already, please remember to subscribe and ring the bell for notifications so you never miss an episode. It's never too late to leave a comment below. I love to hear your thoughts. If you'd like to help me get published, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. And as always, don't forget to like this video and share it with friends on your favorite social media.